Very quiet here. Good evening and welcome everybody to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council regular meeting for Thursday, February 26th. I can't believe we're at the end of February. With that, I will call the meeting to order and I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Please be seated. With that, I'd entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions, concerns, comments? Hearing none, it's adopted by unanimous consent. Thank you, everybody. With that, we're going to move on to public comments. We have a full group of folks here tonight. As is my charge, I will read the broad strokes here. The council will not be accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on agenda items or any other topic the council might not have purview or control over. However, the mayor or council may not respond to comments from the public if the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over. Then the mayor or presiding officer may request the speaker suspend their comments. The council may direct staff to follow up on items brought up by the public. Comment is limited to 3-minute time limit. Thank you, Chief Harden. Appreciate that very much. And gosh, I'm gonna have to one of my reading glasses here. I think Jerry Effenberger is first. Seattle City Light. Please join us at the podium, Jerry.
My name is Jerry Effenberger. I'm a resident of Lake Forest Park, and I'm just here as a concerned citizen. Good evening to the council members. I'm here to address a serious concern regarding Seattle City Light, a franchisee serving our community. I'd like to talk about affordability. Between 2013 and 2023, Seattle City Light raised residential rates 33.7%, another 5.7% in 2023, and they currently project 7 to 10% annual increases through 2030. That's an incredible burden for the fixed income and working poor residents of Lake Forest Park and other areas of King County they serve. Approximately 4 years ago, I discovered that Seattle City Light's low-income benefit program is deceptively constructed to exclude those most in need. Although they serve only areas of King County, the county with the highest median income in Washington at $125,000, Seattle City Light's low-income benefit eligibility is based on 70% of statewide median income of $99,000. I raised this issue with the then acting CEO, general manager, proposing that the inequity of their existing program be corrected by mirroring King County's property tax relief, which uses 80% of area median income as its low-income benefit eligibility threshold. After several years of unproductive exchanges, a new CEO, Don Lindell, acknowledged the inequity. On October 7, 2024, she committed to me in writing to update their low-income benefit program guidelines as I had initially proposed, effective September 2025. Unfortunately, she advised me in August of 2025 that the project had been overruled by the Seattle City Council, who effectively serves as the Seattle City Light Board of Directors. Since then, my communications with both the Seattle City Council and Mayor Harrell have gone unanswered, and now we have a completely new administration there. The revised programs agreed by Mr. Lindell would provide meaningful energy relief to over half of Lake Forest Park residents, including other areas of King County. I urge you to champion this significant affordability issue, ensuring our community needs are addressed in the era of ever-increasing energy costs. I want to thank you for your attention. Acting alone, I'm not sure I can bring this potential significant community benefit to fruition. I need your guidance and help. I'd be happy to meet personally with any of you at your convenience. Each of you have been provided a copy of this presentation that includes all the supporting documentation and my contact information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Effenberger. Appreciate your time. With that, we're moving on to Alan Keast. Mr. Keast. Welcome.
Alan Keast, city resident, speaking on the resolution regarding Homeland Security. Been in touch with a couple of council members and submitted some written comments during the past week, and appreciate all of the work that's gone on in evolving it. And I know it's a modified version before you tonight. In regard to that, and I know there's some discussion of possibly holding back some major policy considerations until the legislature finishes sessions. If that's done, I respect the desire to do that. But in regard to the motion before you tonight, I would suggest one amendment, which I've given one of the council members, to catch up to the City of Seattle policy, and that is to secure scenes of potentially unlawful acts to gather evidence for transmittal to prosecutors. I think that could be done without too much controversy. Beyond that, there are, I know from the council, some desire to do two things. Number one is to get more clarification from the King County prosecutor of how to interface with them. I support that, and I know that'll take a couple of weeks, and I certainly understand that. And then secondly, to consider the matter of the big policy piece that does not exist in this current draft, and that is intervention, how to intervene safely and as much as reasonably possible to stop law breaking during that activity. And that certainly deserves a couple of weeks of thought as well. So if those things proceed, I don't see any objection. But I do want to say that this matter, and we will be all of us working together to stay on this until we get to the point where this is a safe community for federal law enforcement. This matter is something that puts a burden on all of us. And we need to work in such a way that we actually make the necessary policy changes by the elected officials so that our city is as safe as it could possibly be. I don't think there's any reason that cannot be done. So I think myself and others, we will be working with you over the next month as you delve deeper into this so that when we get to the end, we have done what this community needs, which is to be safe to the greatest extent possible that this municipality can bring it. We're not there now, and further work needs to be done. But that is what's before us. It is serious. If we fall short, we risk permanently traumatizing children. We risk death of our residents, and none of us couldn't even imagine those things happening. But that has essentially happened in Chicago and Minneapolis. And we must stay on this issue and do it in a timely way. We don't know when the enforcement surge will come, and we must be ready for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keast. Appreciate your time. Julian Anderson. Welcome, Julian.
Good evening, Julian Anderson, resident of Lake Forest Park. My comments tonight are a change-up. I could easily be reading a stem-winding critique of the current revisions of Resolution 26-2061, who some see as timid. I could not so easily, because of the 3-minute limit, be delivering a critique of the long-established habits and perceptions of staff and council on display during the recent council retreat, perhaps characterized as the comfort found within the protection of circled wagons. But a couple days ago, a post in Nextdoor, of all places, raised my attention out of my hothouse of blossoming critiques and caused me to go outside and take a deep breath. Here's the text of that surprising post from a resident of Matthews Beach. The poster had also, if you look, attached several landscape photos that fit the message. Our profound debt to the humble moss. Although cyanobacteria first began infusing the early Earth's atmosphere with oxygen, this gas essential to all life, nearly all life, it was not until oceanic algae transitioned into simple, non-vascular plants, mosses, that began colonizing the land roughly 500 million years ago, that sufficient levels of this life-sustaining gas were produced by photosynthesis to allow the evolution of all the planet's air-breathing life, including you and me. Further, moss not only allowed air-breathing life to colonize the early Earth, all the world's moss sequesters more carbon than all of its trees. So it is continuing to try to keep the planet habitable even today, countering anthropogenic climate change. So next time you pass a patch of moss, humbly express your gratitude. So I went outside to do that. No doubt at every level in these days, there is much stress, but especially as we together strengthen our understanding of this country as a shining city on a hill and a nation worthy of France's gift of the Statue of Liberty, we will find actionable remedies for the attacks, rhetorical and physical, that erode such national values. I suggest that we, all of us, from time to time, go outside, take a deep breath of our oxygenated atmosphere. Let that feed your brain. And yes, thank the moss. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julian. Appreciate your time and your thoughts. Sage advice. That's all I have here tonight listed on the sign-in sheet. Is there anybody else in council chambers that would like to make public comment at this time? No, hearing none, we'll close public comment. Thank you, everybody. With that, we're moving on to presentation. Quick presentation, as I understand from our friend, Commissioner of Public Lands, Dave Upthegrove. Welcome, Mr. Upthegrove. Appreciate your time. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Mayor French and members of the council. My name is Dave Upthegrove. I have the honor of serving as Washington State's Commissioner of Public Lands, where I get to lead 2,200 mission-driven employees at the State Department of Natural Resources. And I want to thank you for this gift of time and place to give me the opportunity to honor the late Lori Bodie, your former deputy mayor. As you know, Lori was a lifelong champion of rivers and salmon and our natural world. She was an attorney in natural resources who built collaboration among tribes and governments and communities. She helped lead the Northwest Office of American Rivers and worked for both NOAA and the EPA. And at the Bonneville Power Administration, Lori oversaw habitat restoration and conservation, land and water acquisitions, and environmental protection programs all over the region. And she was especially passionate about her work with the Washington Water Trust, protecting and restoring the rivers she loved. And because of her extraordinary contributions to Washington's public lands and waters, I'm here as Commissioner of Public Lands to share that the Washington State Department of Natural Resources is planting a Douglas fir tree in her honor. And I would like, if she doesn't mind, to invite her daughter Anna up to read to her and share the presentation. And it reads, "In passing tribute to a life of meaning and impact, a Douglas fir will be planted in the memory of Lori Bodie. The Douglas fir, a pillar of Washington's natural heritage, symbolizes both strength and grace and serves as a living reflection of the enduring human spirit. Lori's contributions to her family, Lake Forest Park community, and the entire state of Washington will remain a source of inspiration, while her life and legacy will continue to echo across our forests. May this tree serve as a quiet and steadfast witness to a life well lived." I'd like to present that to you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And on a more personal level, Lori's story was also one of family, of love and resilience. I don't know if you knew, she was the daughter of a Hungarian refugee who fled Nazis to find a home here in America. And she became a wife, a mother, a sister, an aunt. 1970, she met this old guy behind me, Peter Eglick, at the University of Pennsylvania. And by the next year, they were together and they remained together for the rest of her life. Lori and I spoke just occasionally about politics, about environmental policy, often about sound transit. And what struck me most probably was her intelligence. She didn't suffer fools, and her clarity of values. And well, many here knew her much more deeply than I had the opportunity to. I'm very grateful that she touched my life. And her passing sort of brings to mind my favorite poem. And I like to read it as a prayer. And it begins, "People, People important to you, people unimportant to you, cross your life and touch it with love and carelessness and move on. There are people who leave and you breathe a sigh of relief and wonder why you ever had to come into contact with them. There are people who leave and you breathe a sigh of remorse and wonder why they had to go away and leave such a gaping hole. Children leave parents, friends leave friends, acquaintances move on. Enemies hate and move on, friends love and move on. You think of the many who have moved into your hazy memory, and you look at those present and wonder. I believe in God's master plan in lives. He moves people in and out of each other's lives, and each leaves her mark on the other. Pray that we accept these bits and pieces with humility and wonder, never question, and never regret. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Really appreciate your time. A very fitting tribute to Lori's memory, and it's a big hole in all our hearts for her passing. Thank you so much for that. Give me a second. We are going to move on to the swearing in of this Chief Harden, the swearing in of a new officer, Connor Levy. Welcome, Chief.
Good evening. All right. So good evening, Mayor, Council, and community, and all the friends and officers that showed up for Connor swearing in. So I want to introduce you to our newest officer, Officer Connor Ivey. Connor, you want to come up? Thank you. So Connor was born and raised in Washington State and spent most of his life in Gig Harbor. He is a graduate of Peninsula High School, where he met his wife, who's here today, who has been, they're now married for 7 years. Congrats. He earned his associate's degree in arts and sciences from Tacoma Community College. And in 2018, Connor and his wife relocated to Utah so she could attend the graduate school to become a physical therapist. During that time, Connor completed his bachelor's degree in law and criminal justice from Central Washington University while working 70+ hour work weeks to support their family. After returning to Washington in 2021 to be closer to family, Connor began his law enforcement career with Snohomish County Sheriff's Office in 24. He graduated from the Basic Law Enforcement Academy and later transferred to the Corrections Bureau in March 25, where he served as a member of the jail's intelligence team. Through his service with the Sheriff's Office and Corrections Bureau, Ivey gained valuable experience in patrol operations, institutional safety, and intelligence work. He brings that experience along with strong work ethic and commitment to public service to the Lake Forest Park Police Department. He is excited to continue learning, growing, and building a long-term career serving our community. Outside of work, Connor enjoys hiking, hunting, fishing, working out, and spending time with family. He and his wife share their home with 2 Shih Tzus, Bilbo and Frodo wagons. So as I go into this next part, he's also an avid fan of the Lord of the Rings. Extended edition only. The Dark Knight trilogy, and enjoys collecting Pokemon cards and playing role-playing video games. So welcome, Connor. Now that if we can have the mayor come on up, do a quick swearing in here.
Do it.
You've got the sheet. Perfect. You want to just stand right there? Just right.
Right. You have me. I.
Connor Ivey.
Having duly been appointed as a police officer for the city of Lake Forest Park,
Having duly been appointed as police officer for the city of Lake Forest Park,
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully and impartially perform
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully and impartially
perform
perform
the duties of the office as prescribed by law,
the duties of office prescribed by law,
and to the best of my ability.
and to the best of my ability.
And I will support and maintain the ordinances
And I will support and maintain the ordinances
of the city of Lake Forest Park
of the city of Lake Forest Park
and the laws and the Constitution
and the laws of the Constitution
of the state of Washington
of the state of Washington
and the United States of America.
and the United States of America.
Congratulations, officer.
Thank you, sir.
So I would pin a badge on, or our wife would pin on a badge, but we don't have that uniform on today. So you look really nice. So this is your badge and your congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right. You want to just
Let's get a picture of the team. You guys, come on up. Come on up.
Come on, guys, get up here.
Yeah. Commander, y'all. Get up in here.
You guys left out wearing uniforms back there.
Congratulations. Welcome. Thank you again, Chief. Always wonderful to have new members on board and expanding the group here. Moving on, we're going to Chair Phillips is going to be bringing us the Tree Board Annual Report and Work Plan for 2026. Mark, thanks for joining us. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Well, hello, Mayor. Hello, Council. I am Mark Phillips, and for the better part of the last year, I've been the chair of our tree board. So I'm glad to be here to talk with you about our activities and some of our plans for the next year. The purpose of the tree board: public outreach and education about trees, tree planting and maintenance events, and advise the city on tree and community forest matters. So in terms of our activities during the past year, as I reviewed them, it became really clear that the main thing that we did probably was public outreach. We were able to have tables at 6 community events during the last year. And those were very important, as you can imagine, in terms of being able to directly meet members of the public, to answer some of their questions. For the ones we can't, we refer them to our urban forest planner. And just to generally promote trees. We have some great resources on the tree board. Victoria Kutaz is sitting in the back row. She's an excellent informational designer and has put together several brochures in the last year or two that we use for that outreach purposes. In all due modesty, I want to say that we're getting pretty good at that activity. We've had pretty good success with that. Another thing we did in the past year was to contribute to the climate element of the comprehensive plan. And actually 2 of our members, Victoria and Stacy Spain, were served on the climate policy advisory team, which kind of led that process of putting together the climate element for our comp plan. During the past year, we started our thinking about updating the city's community forest plan. You know that we have one. It was developed, I think, more than 15 years ago, and it could use some updating when we get to it. We've started looking at what other cities have by way of forest management plans, and discussing what the structure of a plan should look like. And I'll say another word about that in a minute. But another thing we did, we had the opportunity, especially there was a time when we were without an urban forest planner, a period of about 4 or 5 months, I think. And during that time, there were some grant applications in process, and we were able to help support the cities during that interim period in terms of furthering the applications. There were 2 grants. One was, as you know, the Sustainable Forest Initiative, SFI, and the King Conservation District Canopy Study. For that SFI grant, we corresponded with the SFI contact in Washington, D.C. by email, and we attended Victoria and I attended a virtual meeting with that person along with Director Hoffman. We helped draft a letter of interest in SFI that I think eventually went out under your signature, Mayor.
It
The SFI grant is for $71,000. And it will take a systematic look at how we as a city manage our community forest, and it'll identify what we're doing well and where there are gaps. And it's one of the reasons we have held off on pushing too hard again on the community forest management plan, because that study, when we're able to do it, will yield information that will really be at the heart of a updated community forest management plan. In terms of you know that application has not yet come before the council, and it's awaiting, I think, now probably a new urban forest planner That person will have a key role in managing the grant, so it's important that that person be on board before we move ahead with that. In terms of the KCD grant, we had a similar function, communicating with the contact at KCD to clarify the requirements of the grant and understand what was required of us. That grant is for $4,500. And it's money that all the KCD already holds in an account dedicated for Lake Forest Park. So we'll just be drawing on money that has already been collected from residents of our city. What it will do will give us a more detailed look at the canopy of our urban forest. It'll look all the way down at individual parcel level. It will look at precincts. I think there are 6 or 7 or 8 within the city, and give us that kind of a little more detailed view. And there's another category called hexagons, which I don't fully understand, but it seems to be 5 or 6 parcels together. So it's not at the extreme parcel level, but it's an interesting configuration of detail to look at. The other thing that it will do for us, we were able to specify wetlands as a category that we'd like information about. So we can ask questions like if we want to do reforestation on our streams, should we concentrate on Lion Creek? Should we concentrate on Mackinac Creek? Some things like that. So just one more point in terms of looking at activities, and this is really just a holding pattern that we've been in. We have continued to hold work that was done the prior year on 2 proposals for code amendments that we would like to bring to the council when it's appropriate for us to do that. One is an expansion of our city's official tree list, fleshing that out quite a bit and giving some more detail to that. That's the list of what we consider to be, as a city, acceptable trees for replacement purposes. And the other area where we've been working has to do with a redefinition of exceptional trees. Exceptional trees are the very large trees, and we have a proposal that would modify the definition a little bit so as to include a few more of our very large trees for the extra level of protection. You know that the very large trees do more than proportionally the ecological functions that we value trees for. So looking ahead to the next year, and I'm referring to documents I believe were in your packet, so I'm not spelling them out too much, but we will again be doing public outreach events, probably the same 5 or 6 that we were able to do this last year. April 4th, just around the corner, we'll be at the city's Green Fair in the Commons. And another thing I just wanted to point out is that we will be sponsoring a tree walk. That's for April 24th in celebration of Arbor Day. And it'll be a tree walk in this neighborhood here around City Hall, just to the east of City Hall. And it'll be led by a recently retired member of our tree board, Richard Olmsted. You may recall that a year ago, Dick led a tree walk around the Horizon View Park. And it was just an amazing event. If you have a chance to do this one, he'll be leading this one again, even though he's not a tree board member, but he's got so much information about trees that he can point out to us and give a better appreciation, identification of trees. And we were walking along Horizon View, and he looked at the ground and saw something that looked kind of like duckweed to me. It did look like something you would scoop up and, put in the compost pile pretty quickly. He said, this plant is like in the plant world, this is a correspondent to fruit flies in the biology world in terms of being a base organism that's used for so much experimentation and study in terms of understanding plant life. I thought that was an interesting kind of revelation. It's all around us, so I guess that's why it lends itself to research. So just speaking about tree walks, I just wanted to point out to you, you probably already know, that there are 4 tree walks that are available for download from the city's website. These are tree walks that were originally developed by David Hepp, citizen of Lake Forest Park, some 20 years ago, and they were published in a very popular little booklet that you've undoubtedly seen. So working with David, Dick Olmsted took the lead on updating. 3 of them have been updated with wonderful color photos and cleaned up where some of the trees are no longer there after 20 years and some other interesting information. So those tree walks are downloadable. In fact, we'll probably use one of them when we do the tree walk on the 24th. You go into our website, search for tree walks of Lake Forest Park, and you'll get right there and you can see those. They're a really tremendous resource for us. And another thing that we look forward to is we have been invited to present on the city's tree ordinance to the Windermere Realtors. Educating realtors about our tree policies has been on every list since I've started working with trees as a worthwhile thing for us to do, so that people buying new houses in the city have some heads up through their realtor as what they can expect in terms of our tree ordinance. So the date has not been set yet, but it's a firm invitation to meet with the realtors from Windermere. We're discussing again in the future some kind of a tree giveaway or planting event in the fall. And so there'll be more news coming on that. It may be that we'll be coming to the council and asking for a small draw on the tree fund if we need to get in a situation where we need to buy some trees to distribute to the public. I just finally mention a word about personnel. For all of 2025 and for most of the prior year before that, we have had 6 members. We had 6 members on our tree board. That means we had 1 vacancy for all of that time. So we do want to thank you all for several weeks ago, you approved the appointment of 3 new enthusiastic tree board members. And you also recently reappointed Richard Saunders and myself to continue serving on the tree board. So thank you for that. We're at 8 members now, and I think we're in pretty good shape. Victoria is now the chair of the tree board, and Stacy Spain will be serving as the vice chair. I mentioned Dick Olmsted several times. We're really going to miss him. He is a retired, well, he's a professor emeritus of biology at the UW. And he's contributed so many ways to the tree board function, and we will miss him. We still have one other person with bona fide expertise. Doug Sprugel is a retired forestry professor from the UW also. So, and finally, just to note, once again, we are without an urban forest planner, and I'm sure that you're as concerned about that as I am and we are as a tree board. Personally, I think it's a very tough job. We have a strong and a detailed tree protection ordinance in Lake Forest Park, and I think it can be a challenge to explain, even for somebody whose job it is to explain that. I think it's fair to say that most of the residents in Lake Forest Park are on board with the city's goal of extending and improving the health of our community forest. But I know from experience that's not true for everyone. And I think there is an element of an adversarial component or a conflict component that's built into that job that person has to deal with on a regular basis. Although when I've talked to them in the past, they've never complained about that aspect of the job. Maybe it's my own aversion to conflict that I'm reading into that situation. But in addition, we want that person to support the tree board, and we want that person to lead effort in managing the long-term health of our forest. So it is a demanding job. I don't know what the solution is, but somehow we need to get more long-serving people in that position. We need to be sure candidates understand the nature of the work, and we need to be sure that they're okay with the part-time hours that go with that position. So thank you for the time to share this with you, and be happy to answer any questions you might have or hear any comments you might have about our work, especially maybe future work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Very important work. Colleagues, questions for Mr. Phillips? Start with Councilmember Rosenau.
Small clarification, I think you said April 24th. It's on here, it says April 27th.
It's
For the
not the
walk?
actual day of Arbor Day. Is that the question?
It says that there's a walk on the 27th in the packet, and you said out loud 24th. I just want to be sure anyone listening or checking the packet gets the right date.
I believe it's the 24th.
Okay. I'm glad I asked. Oh, no?
Does that check out? I'm sure it
I
does.
believe you.
Okay, well, that's what it is. And I think we were planning to start at about 10:30 in the morning. I think it's the time we were working on. And we'll probably be starting here at up front of City Hall after.
Question,
Yes, it is.
Deputy Mayor Furtani.
And thank you, Chair Phillips, or ex-Chair Phillips, I guess.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate yours and all your team's work on all our trees. One of the things that really struck me was with the presentation by Commissioner Upthegrove earlier. It really is the case where basically the best way to honor people is with trees. And what I'm wondering is, as we are transitioning to the newer climate, where we have these more intense storms, where it's going to be warmer overall, even in the winter. Are you thinking about, is your team thinking about basically what might be appropriate on our tree list for the replacement trees? Are you taking climate change into account?
The tree list, as we've updated it, does make a point of noting those trees which are tend to be drought tolerant. We've made that. There's a larger category there, council member, that I'm pretty sure that would be good for us as a tree board to get into at some point, which is kind of more comprehensive thinking about, tree species in the future or how we understand and react to the fact that we can bet over the next 20, 30 years that forest lands in this area will be under stress and will be likely changing. So I think there's a bigger category there. For the time being, we've tried to point out which trees are more drought resistant.
Thanks.
Thank you. I see that Director Hoffman has his hand up. Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director. Much of staff has been busy with a public hearing all week, but behind the scenes, we have a hot off the presses update. Christy Bishop will be joining the city on March 16th to serve as urban forest planner. She comes to us from the city of Issaquah. She's looking for this opportunity. She is a certified arborist. I don't have anything formal prepared for that, but I can tell you that that will occur. And after the 16th, our hopes are that she can come to the council, definitely the tree board, and introduce herself and begin work. Now, in the past, that was a 4 or 5 month gap, but it also included the hiring and then a couple months of getting up to speed. There's quite a bit to do, but we know that the existing programs, existing codes are the first priority. Our hopes are that we can minimize the length of time and begin to focus on the SFI grant, the KCD grant, but without losing sight of Evergreen City and keep on our longer term radar a draft ordinance for the tree list and the criteria for DBH. So tonight, hot off the presses, apologies if that is not in a city administrator report or anything. It's a recent occurrence. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hoffman.
Very good news.
And everybody act really surprised when Vice Chair Goldman announces that Christine has joined our team. Vice Chair Goldman.
I found out about it this afternoon. I was going to break the news until Director Hoffman stole my thunder.
Okay, it's okay, Mark.
Good news, however it comes.
Oh, it's okay.
Sure. It is good. I think this will be a very small gap compared to previous gaps between urban forest planners. So my hope is that Christy will get up to speed quickly and there won't be much gap for the tree board.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It's wonderful. We have somebody new on board and ready to go. Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
You have a lot on your work plan. And I'm glad that you have additional folks on the tree board to help you work through the work plan. The only thing that I have as a comment is thinking about the Arbor Day activities in the tree planting. I know some jurisdictions prefer to do the tree planting part more in the fall.
Right.
Because that's just better for the tree. Are you thinking about dividing the Arbor Day into kind of 2 parts?
Well, strictly speaking, I think you meet some of the requirements that we are interested in Tree City, et cetera, or Arbor City or whatever, that we can do that event anytime, as I understand it, during the year. It doesn't need to be necessarily close proximity to the actual day. Yeah, I guess in a sense, that's what we're doing. We do want to recognize the day by having that tree walk, which is going to be a really great event. You don't want to miss it. And then some kind of another activity, either a tree distribution or a tree planting event in the fall, which you're right. It does make more sense to distribute trees when you get closer to the actual best time for planting.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yes, Councilmember Good.
I'm glad to hear that the tree list is going to be updated and, oops, let me get that closer. Am I understanding that it's going to be more comprehensive down to the tax parcel number?
Well, I don't know what of that how much of that information will make it into a forest management plan. But so they're kind of separate matters that the KCD grant will give us as a city that information, which might help us pinpointing some planting activities or emphasizing educational activities. I don't know, there might be something there that does find its way into a management plan. We'll certainly want to summarize, I think, in a management plan, the efforts that have gone on over the years, at least 3 times, and this might be an additional one, where the city has done an assessment of the canopy of our community forest. So in that sense, it could well contribute as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Friends, any other questions for Mr. Phillips? Thank you very much, Mark. Really
Yes.
appreciate the work that you and the team
Thank
do.
you.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. We're going to be talking about Planning Commission Annual Report and Work Plan for 2026. Who has the lead on this one? Ms. Larson? Oh, just questions. Okay. Okay. Colleagues? Please do. Ms. Larson would appreciate that. Yeah, if you would like to make comments, and David, if you'd like to join her at the mic for any questions that the council has. Sincerely appreciate all the work that you all do.
Good to see you. Do you have any questions about the work plan, or would you just like some summative comments?
Colleagues, Deputy Mayor Furtani.
And thank you both for being here, and thank your whole team for basically the work. I know the Planning Commission is sometimes hidden in the weeds of the policy questions, but you're front and center in terms of helping us understand basically how to deal with the city's various planning needs. And one of the things when I was looking at your work plan, and the council discussed this at the retreat, was that it seems that you've broken it up to 3 broad categories of how your time is going to be divided. And it looks like 2 of them, the critical areas ordinance mandatory update and the Puget Sound Regional Council certification of the periodic update to the Lake Forest Comprehensive Plan transportation element, those are pretty much mandatory. They're basically something that the city has to do, correct?
Yes.
So in terms of quote discretionary time, and I really hate using that word, but basically I'll use it anyway. So the remaining third on the tools and incentives for housing affordability that you have there, that's basically the time that you get to do something fun and innovative and new and stuff.
It's all fun.
I would say, yeah, the 2 mandatory pieces are components that when we were working with Director Hoffman, we acknowledge that there will be some outside support for that to help us with compliance related items. As far as our joint meeting together, a lot of things were floated about. And when we went back and synthesized that and sort of debriefed that joint meeting, I think we were all very committed to taking the time that we do have aside from the compliance related items and continuing to work on middle housing. We had to put a pin in so much of what was really at the root of what we can and should do as a community in order to comply with state law and get the comp plan up and running. But lots of ideas and I feel like motivations and passions for being an exemplar in our region for middle housing initiatives and incentives that actually get the job done. We observe in our neighboring cities that too often policy ends with compliance and or particular recommendations by forces outside of a city to remove parking restrictions or, take away parking requirements or reduce setbacks or start changing code beyond what the law requires, which just has us as a community giving away our leverage. And all of those code changes that we didn't pass to you as part of our initial set of recommendations are being reserved as incentives to get the kind of housing we've all said that we're really interested in. I don't think any of us are super interested in $1 million townhomes. We're looking for something that provides a diversity versus a density of housing. And so
I just really want to acknowledge you, Maddie, because your legacy really is for the moving forward with the planning commission is looking what is our leverage, right? And I think that's a very important component of the conversation moving forward in terms of what the planning commission will be doing.
It'll come to you for adoption, but I would say the same thing that we've been saying in our meetings, which is be very cautious about what you change in the code, and that if it doesn't, if it isn't used as a leverage point, we know we won't meet the goals that we have for our tree canopy, our critical areas, for our climate action plans. If we take a siloed approach to decision making, and I think we have so much great work that's happened through the decades here to refer back to, we understand where our values are, and now is the time to not rush into knee-jerk changes with our code that will foster more development, because as one of our community leaders long ago said when we were working on town center, be careful what you wish for, because you might get something you, or be careful what you do, you might get what you don't want. So I just want to be
unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences. We talk about that a lot. So really thinking about being judicious about how code changes are applied and to serve what particular values and goals in our community. And so I think that's something that the commission feels really strongly about being able to work on in a really thorough evidence-based way. So hopefully you guys will be working in support of that.
Yeah, and I'm really glad to hear you say that because, you know, you may have seen the video already of the retreat, but the council had some thoughts about basically these very topics that you're speaking of. And so we're really looking forward to working with you. And, you know, I think it should be a conversation between the planning commission and the council and trying to come up, as you say, with the best possible solution for Lake Forest Park. We do have an affordability issue, but we also have basically certain values we have in this community. And so I think there's a tension there, and as you say, not giving away leverage, but to outside forces. But the point is that basically we probably do have to do something shortly. So I'm really looking forward to working with you on these.
I'm done at the end of the month, so won't be with me.
Vice Chair Goldman.
Yeah, thank you very much for both of you being here. And I believe Commissioner Cloeno, is that? Yeah, I believe we'll be renewing your membership later in this meeting. We had a really good productive joint meeting between the council and the planning commission last month. And then the council has continued these conversations, as the deputy mayor mentioned, that we at our Saturday retreat, and then again Monday at our committee of the whole meeting. I think our liaison, Councilmember Rosenell, will be talking a bit more about it at your next meeting. But I think the general sense of the council is two things. One is that we would like the planning commission to look at other middle housing types that can be appropriate, such as cottage housing, courtyards, things similar to that would provide sort of gentle density. And then what you had already mentioned, which is the incentives that will get the developers to actually build the middle housing rather than the McMansions that we're trying to move away from. So I think those are things that the council is quite excited about. So we look forward to continuing these conversations.
Aligned with.
Yeah, very much.
Colleagues, other questions or comments?
Just to say it in the same vein. So I'm really excited to see your work plan and to see what you guys come up with on the
We look
mission.
forward to your partnership.
Anytime.
Well, we thank you very much, and go right ahead.
I just, my brain is a sieve, and maybe we talked about this before and I just forgot, and that's fine if so. But I know at the end of the year, the planning commission and council added the climate element to the comp plan. And I wonder if you see places in this work plan where anything of that will shape, I guess, especially in part one of the work plan, where the climate element as the newest part of that shakes anything up do you see directions there?
Well, I think that's always a guiding document and perspective that we're always paying attention to. I think that's just what we bring to the.
Everything
table
needs to be
that's-
weighed against
Yeah.
documents like our climate action planning goals, like our critical areas ordinances, like our tree canopy goals, that we have very well established goals and values in our community around a number of issues. And anything that happens within the building code, we feel pretty strongly, I think, that needs to be weighed against those so that we can avoid the unintended consequences, rather than just saying, this sounds good, or all of our neighboring communities have done that, let's go down this road. But instead, pressure test it against those other important goals that we have.
Thank you. Director Hoffman.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to go at the end and not steal anyone's questions or comments this time. Just a couple of things. First off, I wanted to thank Maddie for her service. She is terming out more or less after joining you tonight on the 28th. So I just wanted to make sure she heard from staff and the community a very big thank you. The chairperson, Sam Kastic, is traveling tonight. And normally either a written or verbal annual report is given. But in January, we had the joint meeting, conversation about the 2025 work plan, what was accomplished, and then the draft 2026 work plan that's before you. The annual report is pretty easy. It was the climate element recommendation that led to the council's adoption, and it was the middle housing development regulations review and recommendation that went to city council. The third level of work was the beginning of the conversation on the tools, which is now in the 2026 work plan. So I just wanted to bring it up and not only thank Maddie as a past chair, long-term commissioner, but that we didn't forget that an annual report was due tonight. And in place of Chair Kastic, I just wanted to mention what the commission accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hoffman. And thank you, Maddie, for your service.
Absolutely.
We really do appreciate it. That's sincerely. A long time serving. And colleagues, other questions for our friends here? I just wanted to say at the end of this that we do fiercely protect the independence of the Planning Commission, and the diversity of viewpoints on the Planning Commission is absolutely essential. So any assertions to the contrary are not within the spirit of what we believe in this community, in my opinion. I assume everybody shares those sentiments. So continue to do the great work you're doing. Really do appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Take that to the planning commission.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Yeah. All right. Thank you. With that, we're moving on to proclamation. Councilmember Good is going to recognize March 2026 as Women's History Month. Councilmember.
Women's History Month, whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of our nation in countless recorded and unrecorded ways, and whereas American women have played and continue to play critical economic, cultural, and social roles in every sphere of the life of the nation by constituting a significant portion of the labor force working inside and outside of the home, and whereas American women have played a unique role throughout the history of the nation by providing the majority of the volunteer labor force of the nation, and whereas American women were particularly important in the establishment of early charitable, philanthropic, and cultural institutions in our nation, and whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background served as early leaders in the forefront of every major progressive social change and movement, and whereas American women have served our country courageously in the military, and whereas American women have been leaders not only in securing their own rights of suffrage and equal opportunity, but also in the abolitionist movement, the emancipation movement, the industrial labor movement, the civil rights movement, and other movements, especially the peace movement, which create a more fair and just society for all. And whereas, despite contributions, the role of American women in history has been consistently overlooked and undervalued in the literature, teaching, and study of American history. Now, therefore, the mayor and the city council of Lake Forest Park do hereby proclaim March 2026 as Women's History Month in the city of Lake Forest Park and urge all residents to join in this special observance signed this day, this 26th day of February 2026. Mayor Tom French.
Thank you, Councilmember Good, very much. A very important
A
proclamation.
lot of big words in that.
There's that's why I asked you to read it, actually. Big words. Thank you so much for that. With that, we're moving on to the consent calendar. I entertain a motion for adoption.
So moved.
Do I hear a second? It's been moved and seconded. And are there any questions, concerns? Thank you, Council. It's adopted by unanimous consent. Yes, sir.
And it's been mentioned earlier, but I also wanted to honor Mr. Cluano and the reappointment to the Planning Commission. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. With that, we're moving on to ordinances and resolutions for introduction or referral. Let's see, resolution 26/2065, authorizing the mayor to sign the King Conservation District member jurisdiction grant. Chris, you have the floor. Welcome. Oops, my mic.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I'm here to bring resolution 26/2065, authorizing the mayor to sign the King Conservation District member jurisdiction grant before you for the first time. The city of Lake Forest Park has been awarded $112,000 in member jurisdiction funds from King Conservation District. The fund grant program supports project proposals that meet both jurisdictional and district policies priorities for natural resource improvement. Funds have been awarded to the city for a green stormwater solution pilot project. I'm here to answer any questions you have and bring this to you for the first time.
Colleagues, questions for Mr. Corwell? Fairly perfunctory. Vice Chair Goldman.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So this money would be coming from the KCD grant that Lake Forest Park taxpayers have been putting into it for years. We also heard earlier tonight from the tree board that they would take a small portion of that pot for the GIS data. Are there any other projects planned in the future that would use this KCD money?
Not that I'm aware of. The tree board's funds and these funds are not competitive. They're separate. And my understanding is there's between $20,000 and $30,000 left in the jurisdiction fund for future potential projects. So,
yeah, I'm glad we're finally using this money. It's been accumulating for a long time.
Colleagues, other questions from Mr. Corwell? Deputy Mayor for Attorney. Sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Cole, for your for shepherding all this through. I know that writing a grant, administering it is actually pretty tough work. So, my appreciation on that. The question I have is that I'd heard from the Stewardship Foundation that there was a potential pilot project for rain gardens in Lake Forest Park, and I was very excited by that. Could some of these funds be applied to that kind of thing?
This project will include rain gardens, permeable pavement, cisterns, other green stormwater infrastructure, best management practices. So yes, these funds will be used for something exactly like that. Yeah,
it's very cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Corwell? Okay, thank you very much. We will be bringing that back. Or are we moving forward?
May I ask a question? So,
Yes, please,
reading the contract, it says that we have until June to accept the money, right? Or something like that?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no urgency per se on this.
There's no urgency. Correct.
Great. Thank you.
My suggestion is to put this on.
Oh, the usual thing.
Yeah.
All right. So,
except he has.
Oh, yeah. I'm just curious. It talks about 10 to 20 project locations.
Mhm.
Are those things that people are going to apply for? Is that something that you're going to identify and reach out to property owners? Because all but one of these projects is going to be on private property. Is that right?
Potentially all of the projects. I specifically wrote into the grant proposal that maybe we'll do one in a non-private, non-residential setting to be a demonstration project for the community. The locations will be determined at a later date. We left that open in this so that we can thoughtfully sort of refine how we're going to pick those locations in a way that is fair to the community. So.
Councilmember, Deputy Mayor Furtoni.
I'd like to make a motion then to, I guess we'll table the three touch rule.
Well, point of order, I believe this is our second touch because I remember you came to the council a few months ago to introduce the rain garden project.
Yes, so I'm not sure if this counts as the second touch or not. I did come in maybe August or September and give a presentation on this. I think that was informal. I'm not sure which touch.
We still have to waive the three touch rule, even if it is the second touch.
That
rule.
would be fine.
Right.
We love accepting other people's money, so let's bring it on.
But if we're going to be approving it at our March 12th meeting, that would be the normal third touch.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so the reason I'm offering to do the three touch rule is because our habit has become to put it on the consent agenda for the next meeting. And that way we don't have to have Chris come in again. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to waive the three touch rule. It's also non-controversial. It is our money.
Councilmember Riddle.
Motion?
Okay,
We're getting wrapped around the axle here, folks.
we are.
We all know what we want to do here, which is accept somebody else's money, bet it on money. Let's figure out a path forward, please.
So I did make the motion.
I second that motion.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to waive the three touch rule regarding Resolution 262065. Any questions, comments, or discussion? Councilmember Riddle.
I think we may need to look at this again for this type of scenario, because I think we can just put anything on the consent calendar later. It would be the third touch. So I think maybe we can have a further conversation of this procedure. But in this case, since it's been moved, I think it's important, and I think putting on the consent calendar makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? There's a motion on the floor to suspend the three touch rule for Resolution 262065. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it.
I will abstain on the grounds that I think it's moot, but I have no objections.
Okay. Yes, Deputy Mayor Furtoni.
Now I'll formally move to approve Resolution 2065, authorizing the mayor to sign the King Conservation District member jurisdiction grant and to place it on the consent calendar for next agenda.
Do I hear it?
Second.
A second. No. We should just approve it because then you're just
Yeah, I
going
thought
to
we
the
just
same
waived it.
routine.
Okay, then I withdraw the consent part.
Okay, so for clarification, this is for authorization tonight. Kim is looking
Very
pensive.
concerned.
Or
Are you moving this tonight for approval? Is our question. If you're placing it on, okay, I hear a yes.
Let's move it tonight, please.
All right, let's
So
move
then
it.
you've removed the consent
Yeah.
calendar. Okay.
All right, so I'll restate the motion. It is to approve Resolution 2065, authorizing the mayor to sign the King Conservation District member jurisdiction grant, period.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded to suspend the three touch rule and authorize the mayor to sign Resolution 2065, signing the King Conservation District member jurisdiction grant. Any questions or comments?
My only comment is I think we really, as a council, have muddled this up procedurally. But I think we all agree that this is completely non-controversial. There's no fiscal impact because it is our money. We're just basically asking to take the money out of KCD's bank account and use it. So completely non-controversial. I have no objections, but yes, I'd like to see us clean up, and that's why we're working on the governance manual revisions to clean up the procedural side of this.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goldman. Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments on point? Hearing none, all those in favor?
One quick thing. I always appreciate Councilmember Goldman's explanation of what we're doing and why we're doing it when we do waive the three touch rule. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember Good. Anyone else? All those in favor of the aforementioned what they said? I'm getting wrapped around the axle too. Please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Guys have it. Thank you, council. So suspension of the three touch rule on resolution 262065 and passage tonight after two touches. Appreciate that. There's Mud, team. Thank you. And to council, a couple council members' points. Yes, that's a good place for some clarification, I think, in the governance manual.
Yes.
Before we get too bound up on that. You're all set.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a joke in here somewhere. I'm just gonna let it go. Yes, we're moving on to Director Hoffman, Resolution 26-2066, authorizing the mayor to sign a second amendment and extension to the professional services agreement with SAFEbuilt Washington LLC for municipal building services coverage. This is an important one. Director Hoffman, you have the floor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, there's quite a history of vacancy in the building official position. Calvin was with the city approximately 20 years. He retired in October of 2024. While that recruitment took place, we employed the services of a building services consultant, SAFEbuilt, with a great track record. That agreement has been in place all of last year. The recruitment resulted in the hiring of a new building official who was with the city about 4 months, 4.5 months, somewhere in that range. During that period, they were focused on the building officials' duties, but inspections and plan reviews of building permits stayed with SAFEbuilt. We were never able to completely transition to an in-house building official doing all of this full scope. So the contract remains in place. We originally thought that we would phase it out and not need it, and then in the future explore a backup contract for consulting services. However, the need is there again. So as of February, the building official position is vacant. We're asking to extend the timeline of the SAFEbuilt contract in this amendment into 2027, but it would also need the not to exceed amount to be increased. So that request mirrors the initial 2025 period. So it's a simple amendment as far as the resolution goes. Another element is that exhibits A and B, the scope of work and the rates also need to be updated. And the no action is being requested tonight. It's essentially for introduction, first touch. No urgency. The services are being provided. The key date, I believe, is March 31st, in which case this original agreement expires. So we have the opportunity to come back and present again twice in March if needed. And that's my summary. Everything else is in the packet for your questions or follow-up.
Thank you, Director Hoffman. Colleagues, questions for Director Hoffman? This is important work. Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
When you come back with this, can you give me a sense of how close we're getting the total not to exceed, how much we're using this contract work? Is that something you can bring next time?
Actually, I have it for you tonight.
I'll take it.
Yeah, but the last invoices, we would reach the current not to exceed at some point in March.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Great question. Mr. Goldman.
Yes, thank you. So I'm curious, how goes the search for a new permanent in-house building officer?
We started the recruitment immediately, had a series of applicants, did phone interviews with 2 and decided not to move forward with either of the 2. One was a previous candidate from the prior recruitment, but there were some concerns. So the recruitment's live. There's a lot going on as far as recruitment. Our current focus is with the climate coordinator. We're very fortunate for the urban forest planner, and this contract would give us the flexibility and breathing room through 2026 to provide that mandatory service to the community in a very high level, high quality, professional manner. Our hope is that when we get an opportunity to re-advertise or extend or somehow get the word out that we're still searching, that we would not need this whole time period. But as you see in the current agreement, we needed it through March 2026. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hoffman. Vice Chair Goldman. Yes, Councilmember Rosenau.
In light of that timing that you're mentioning, is there anything that we need to worry about that if the rates are changing, that the timeline available by which it would be expended would then be shorter? Is there any concern that we run out of the not to exceed before the contract might expire?
Not concerned. I mean, it's always better. I don't think it's urgent, but if we were to come back the first meeting of March, then we may be in that situation with invoices crossing in the ether. But at that point, we'd be consistent with the original agreement. As we get later into March, that may actually become an issue. But we're not worried. We're not worried, and it's February 26th.
Fair question. Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues, any other questions for Director Hoffman? Okay, hearing none, we will be revisiting this at the next meeting. Thank you, Director Hoffman. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay. We get to go do some fun stuff. Chief Harden, Resolution 262067, revival of the Police Department Motors Unit purchase of a traffic enforcement police motorcycle, training of one motor officer. I have mine limited certification, so.
All right.
Yeah.
You're in.
I've been holding on to it.
Got a swearing in motorcycle.
Yeah. Chief.
So there's a new movie with Chris Pratt, Mercy. And in the movie, if you saw it, there's a drone motorcycle. So when I saw it, I said to my wife, I need to talk to council. So here we are tonight. I'm going to be asking for this drone motorcycle. Pretty amazing. So good evening, council. Before you is resolution 2067, revival of the motors unit, purchase of the enforcement motorcycle and training. So tonight our PD is asking to adopt the resolution to purchase the traffic police motorcycle, additional equipment and protective clothing, as well as funding for the officers' training, specialty pay for the CBA rules, per the CBA rules, funded out of the traffic safety funds 002 is what we generally call that here. The City of Lake Forest Park operated a traffic motorcycle unit from 2002 to 2018, spanning approximately 15 years, staffed by 3 different motor officers. During that period, Officer Kokish, Officer Houston, and Officer Wingrove. Following 2018, we tried to fill the motor's position, but there were no eligible officers available to assume the motorcycle assignment. Then about a year and a half later, the pandemic significantly impacted our operations, resulting in suspension of both the traffic and canine assignments. This request does not seek authorization for an additional police officer, full-time employee. An existing patrol officer would be assigned to the motorcycle unit. Patrol coverage would be maintained with the added benefit of a dedicated traffic enforcement. Motorcycle operations would be seasonal and weather dependent. During non-riding hours, the officer would continue regular patrol duties. The department would purchase a BMW police motorcycle, which is the industry standard. BMW motorcycles are purpose-built law enforcement platforms. They are the leading industry standard for traffic enforcement units. Included in the purchase of the police outfitted motorcycle would be the required protective equipment necessary to safely deploy a motor officer. With the department's traffic units now being rebuilt and stabilizing, reinstating the motorcycle assignment would directly support the city's strong and ongoing emphasis on traffic safety. Given the ever increasing commuter traffic traveling on our side of the Lake Washington, a motorcycle unit would serve as an effective enforcement tool and a valuable force multiplier in a variety of response scenarios. Reestablishing the motorcycle enforcement and the e-bike enforcement in the future demonstrates our city's commitment to traffic safety and reinforces the police department's role in protecting the community. The traffic funding source would come from the traffic safety funds, 002. So I'm asking the council to approve the request to reestablish the motors unit, including the purchase of the motorcycle, the safety equipment for the officer, and the training. I'm also asking you to waive the 3-touch rule, as I will have time constraints for selection of the officer, the equipment, shipping, and having them attend the motorcycle training if we want to have this unit in action by summertime. So do we have any questions from council?
Yes, Mr. Riddle.
Of course. The motorcycle program is going to be fully covered under the 002. Just a clarification for me, if we were to have the officer bring the motorcycle to picnic in the park, that would fall under the regular, the regular work under the general fund, correct? Like,
Yeah,
how-
so just
how are we
to.
tracking that.
So basically what we did when we were doing our traffic funds, we came up with a formula because all the officers do some sort of traffic safety. So we came up with a percentage of their time that goes to the traffic fund, and then the rest of it goes to the general fund. So we broken up there with the traffic positions, like Amanda Johnson, our support officer, and the 2 traffic positions and the equipment that is traffic related. All of those went into the funds, but there is a smaller portion that we're going to respond to emergencies. We're going to do some of the normal things that we do out there patrol wise. So I would work with our finance and our city administration on working on some kind of formula that majority of this would be in the traffic safety fund. But when it's snowing out, when we don't have a motorcycle out there and they're doing general patrol duties in a patrol car, that's where we're going to have a smaller percentage that will go into the general fund.
Thank you for that clarification.
And one thing I will add is the current officer position that we would have taking this position is 100% in the general, well, 93% in the general fund. That would increase and would be pulled out of the general fund, put into the traffic safety fund.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Vice Chair Goldman, so starting to raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this to us. I was hoping you could comment a bit more on what sort of activities the officer would do when they're on their motorcycle and how that compares and contrasts with if they were in a police car.
So the maneuverability is the biggest thing. But I think personally, the biggest thing is, and this is I guess subjective. When you see a motorcycle officer, you're probably going to get a ticket. And most of the community knows that. When they get pulled over by a motorcycle, you're likely going to get a ticket because that's their sole job. So is that visual deterrent. So if you see a motorcycle out there running radar, people are going to definitely slow down. They're going to know that I'm likely going to get stopped by this officer if I'm doing some kind of violation on the roadway. A regular patrol car, they're doing general traffic duties as well as everything else that they do. So the idea that, you know, there's a police car sitting out on the road, they could be doing a report, they could be going to a call, or they could be doing traffic related things. So with a motorcycle, there is a difference in the visual deterrent. Maneuverability is another thing. You can really move around with a motorcycle a lot easier and quicker when, you know, this is all based on officer training. So they're very good at doing that. So that's the 2 biggest reasons. And they can get to calls pretty quick with motorcycle. There's a lot of torque in that when you can really maneuver and get up too quick. So when you've got a lot of rush hour traffic that's going on and you need to get ahead to a car that is violated like the HOV lane or the bus lane, you can get up to that car a lot quicker and a lot safer than possibly a patrol car can.
Thank you, Vice. Yep. Deputy Mayor Furtani and then Councilmember Resnick.
And Chief, thank you very much for the, your summary. I think this is a great idea. Two unrelated questions. The first is the BMW motorcycle, will it come in a hybrid or electric format?
I believe it's 1,200 cc's. I think it's motors. It's not electric.
Okay.
Kelly, do you know the answer to that? It's non-electric.
Okay.
Eventually, I think we're going to get there. Just like our patrol cars. I
Yep.
think eventually we'll get there. But no, this is not. And I will say, I don't want to go too deep dive into this. My dad was a motor officer for probably 15 years, started with the Kawasaki, and then it's gone through Harleys and different models of bikes. But this seems to be the industry standard. When you go, a lot of the companies are not making police models anymore. You may be able to buy the bike and try and makeshift it, but BMW is purposely building police motorcycles.
Okay.
Councilmember Rosenthal. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. And the second question was, in terms, we've all seen the reports of how under-policed per capita Washington State is. And I'm wondering, and of course, cities like Bellevue and Seattle are offering huge bonuses and salary increases. Will this basically help with our retention of the officers that we do have?
Yes, because when I'm able to sell our department that we have canine and drones and investigations and a traffic motorcycle and a traffic unit, and when I am able to sell this, this is one of the big reasons why people will come here, because we're a small department. Many people don't think that our small department can do so many really cool things. So it is a very good selling point. And with our CBA, our collective bargaining agreement, when somebody's in the traffic unit, they get an extra percentage of pay. So that is some incentive for doing the program. And in fact, I mean, I don't really want to say this, but I'm gonna, like, the person that wants to do this job came from another agency knowing that this is something that we're looking at doing. So that is a huge selling point.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilmember Rosenau.
So that gets to one of the areas that I wanted to ask about, because I'm mindful that we just had the levy vote that was focused on public safety, and so if we had an extra $1.25 million a year, it's the conversation about $50,000 for a motorcycle is easier. And so people are going to ask, why are we spending money and obviously I know, but the traffic safety fund is dedicated to this, and it's separate from what the levy could have
Correct.
done regardless. But also then understanding that that question of urgency of, could we put this into the budget for next year and make it into the biennial budget rather than, and it sounds like you're saying that that's more of that becomes a staffing issue then and
It does.
retention.
And this is a creative way of trying to be smart about our funds, as opposed to me coming to you and say, we'd like a traffic officer. It's going to be out of the general fund, and it's going to be all this equipment, which adds on a lot of costs, and adding another body to our staffing. That's where things get expensive. And generally, it would be nice for me to ask, because then I have that more ability to do coverage and those kind of things. But this is a creative way to keep costs really, really low and getting a specialty unit part of our traffic unit. You know that my traffic unit with Amanda, with our support officer, 2 traffic officers dedicated, a motorcycle officer, our drone unit, like all these things that are built on the idea that we need to tackle traffic safety. Our traffic calming group would have all of these elements part of it, where they can give all of the information of how fast people are going, what they see anecdotally on the street, and then also data driven by our ticket issuance. We need to get more out enforcement. This is one of those pieces, the 3 E's: engineering, enforcement, and education. So that's all about traffic safety, and this is the enforcement part of it, and education.
Yeah, and then that gets to the other thing I wanted to, or I had one very small question that I was going to put at the end, but are we in putting this $50,000 towards this? Is there some other traffic safety activity that we would forego?
Forego, no, because I think this just builds upon. I mean, I will be coming to you about e-bikes in the future, about what we're going to do about the Burke-Gilman Trail and any of the e-bike issues we have in our city, coupled with an ordinance, again, traffic safety, and likely asking for bikes so that we can do the enforcement to catch people that are, violating the e-bike ordinance. So this is all these little components that come together. There was something else on my mind, but I forgot. Sorry.
And my other question was actually about an e-bike that, that for the maneuverability and for some of the things that you're talking about for a motorcycle, an e-bike, class 3 e-bike that can go 30 miles an hour on most of our streets, not Bothell Way, but most of the streets, that's about as fast as someone should be going. So is there any middle ground there, or it sounds like there are things that the motorcycle does that.
Well, the motorcycle is going to get to a lot of different locations, and we're going to be focused more with with vehicles with the motorcycle. I don't think we're going to have e-bike stopping vehicles. That would be a little strange. Haven't really thought through that kind of aspect of it, but a motorcycle has it's been doing this kind of work for, I'm going to say, since the motorcycle started. I'm sure they were using motorcycles in the military way back in the day, and it transitioned over to enforcement on the road 60, 70 years, I'm guessing. So,
yeah. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Good.
Does this relieve a little bit of pressure on the budget for the cars?
it relieves no pressure. I still need the 3 cars that are getting up there in a decade. This has nothing to do with it, but I guess, in one way it does. Because if this motorcycle officer is out there doing their job, they're not in the other patrol car that they normally would be in. So yes, it does actually. Thank you for pointing that
That's
out.
the right answer.
Colleagues, any other questions for Chief Harden? I would just say this is a perfect use for the 002 fund, honestly. It enhances the ability of our patrol officers already, but think of where we have come, colleagues, in the last year and a half. We now have a fully staffed traffic safety program. We have traffic calming that's in the mix. It's just a question of being able to get things into the pipeline to be implemented. This is another example. E-bikes are next on the agenda, to be quite honest with you. We've had lots of issues and there have been fatalities around the region because unregulated 35, 40 mile an hour little missiles out there. It's pretty scary. So, and it's real. It is. The other question other comment I would just make, unfortunately, this week I've been on the east side a lot, very early in the morning. This corridor at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, there are people doing 70, 80 miles an hour down this corridor continuously. And it's scary. They're not even just doing it in the regular lanes. They're in the bus lanes, going through red lights, doing whatever they can. So anything we can do to get our presence out on the street and help keep our officers safe and pedestrians, multimodal users, and people in their cars safe, we're going to make it happen. So
If I could add one more thing that's kind of a cherry on top is if you approve this, the way I'm looking at this is there will be 3 traffic officers on 4 different crews, which means that there will be pretty much every single day, there will be a traffic officer on duty. And at night, there will be somebody on every 3 days. We don't have 4 traffic officers. The 4th one would be the canine officer working on that. But the way it lays out is essentially we were to have a dedicated traffic enforcement person working every single day in our city. So,
thank you, Chief. Colleagues, what's your pleasure? Deputy Mayor Fertoni.
Right. And one thing I wanted to add to you, Mayor, was basically the fact that we're starting to get reports of drone incidents as well. So there's a lot of new technology we've got to start thinking about.
Indeed.
But for the purposes of this discussion, I'd like to propose to waive the 3-touch rule on the basis that this is not basically adding to our budget. It's coming out of a fund that we already have established that can only be used for things like this. And so I think in the urgency that we need to basically try to get this on by summer, I'd like to propose to waive the 3-touch rule on this.
Second.
Moved and seconded to waive the 3-touch rule on resolution 262067. Any discussion? Vice Chair Goldman.
Yes, so a question. Would you be amenable to, rather than waiving it and passing it tonight, to doing the 3-touch rule to put it on consent for March 12th?
That is acceptable to the motion maker?
And I guess, would that be acceptable to you, Chief?
yeah, that would be fine. 2 weeks is good. I just need to get the bike ordered. It takes time for the bike to get here, get equipped, get all that stuff done. And then we need to get them in training. And so it just keeps extending out. But 2 weeks is, I'm happy. It's passing, so that would be happy.
In that case, I'd like to make a motion to amend the motion to have us waive the 3-touch rule and put it on the consent calendar for our March 12th meeting.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to waive the 3-touch, to amend the waiving of the 3-touch rule and put it on the March 12th calendar, consent calendar. Any discussion on that?
So I think it's great that this is not going to be adding to our general fund. That was a big topic at our retreat on Saturday, that fund is under tremendous financial pressure. I think it's a good policy. I also think we should give the community a couple of weeks in case any of them want to weigh in on this. So that's why I would like to see us take it up on the 12th.
May I make one little correction, Phil, if you want to jump in here? It may come out of the general fund, but then replenished by the 002 because don't you have to do the budget amendment for the CBA part, or is it okay?
I think we're fine.
We're good.
We're
Disregard what
good.
I said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll make sure the council has all the transparency on that.
Perfect.
That has to happen. Any other questions or comments on waiving the 3-touch rule as amended? On the amendment, start with the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. Did we lose Councilmembers? Oh, Councilmember Saunders had to leave at 8. That's right. Going back to the original
Should be
motion.
right.
So that's the amendment. So now we need to do the three-touch.
Right. The three-touch rule waiving. So it's already been made, so.
Yes, all those in favor of waiving the three-touch rule regarding 262067. There's numbers all.
And placing on the consent agenda.
And placing on the consent calendar for March 12th, excuse me, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
I think we're good to go, Chief.
All right.
Appreciate it. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thanks, colleagues. I'm looking at 2066, 67, 61, and I'm losing track of numbers here. Okay, and on to a very, very important topic. Ordinances and resolutions for action. We're moving on to resolution 262061, reaffirming the City of Lake Forest Park's commitment to community policing, de-escalation, and protection of constitutional rights. My apologies, council and members of the public, that I've been unable to be here previously to have be party to this discussion. The work that has been done here by council is exemplary and very, very important. With that, Vice Chair Goldman, are you taking the lead on this discussion, or Deputy Mayor Furtani?
Could either be myself or Councilmember Rosenau.
Or
Yeah.
Councilmember Rosenau, did you want to lead the discussion, or how would you like to proceed? Please.
Yes, so at our previous meeting, we heard from many members of the community who pretty much everyone at the meeting in person spoke in favor of this, and the majority of our feedback online was favorable. And so council members Muhlenberg and Rosenau and myself went through and we made some changes. You can see in the council packet, there's the red line version where you can see the changes we made. I'll just highlight those. The first was adding the names of those individuals who had been killed in interactions with federal immigration enforcement. That's the second whereas statement and also section 1. Also, we changed section 3 to make it a bit more readable, to put it in a bullet list form rather than just one big paragraph. And adding point D on police body cameras. I'm proud to say that all of these are just reaffirming current police department policy, which already goes beyond what the state mandates. And then deleting what was section 5, since that didn't seem to be relevant any longer to this version of the resolution. So those were the changes that we've made to the resolution.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goldman. Colleagues who would like to speak to it, start with Councilmember Good and Deputy Mayor Bertani.
Well, per our I'm not really sure how to handle this, but per our public comment, there is a statement that seems to be in line with the city of Seattle that could be added as item E after D. I could present it to Councilmember Vice Chair Goldman right there. I rewrote it for you.
Okay, so, and just to clarify, so that says, police shall secure scenes of potentially unlawful acts to gather evidence for transmittal to prosecutors.
Yes. And that would just be, that's and consistent with the city of Seattle. But it needs.
Correct.
I would just ask that we check that against our own police department policies. And we've done that a couple times as you guys have, added very important things to this resolution. And if we can just check them and maybe there's a little tweak to the wording if we want to add something like that.
Okay, is this something that the chief has been informed about?
No, but I'm willing, I wanted to bring it forward and.
Yeah, this seems perfect. I mean, this seems reasonable, but I agree with our attorney that we want to make sure that it's written in a way that's consistent, that we're not creating any apparent contradictions.
Let's take a moment. Let's continue the discussion. I would just suggest too, and I think this is has a lot of merit. Let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the really very good.
Is it okay if I just go bring this to the police chief now so you can see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leave it in your.
You all want to take a 5-minute recess?
Yeah, this is an important discussion.
Let's
so
take a
we can
5-minute
really-
recess, give our friends a chance to talk, and we'll be right back. So we'll be back. Let's call it 8:41. Hi, folks. We're going to take another 5-minute recess to finish up.
Oh, okay.
Belay that. I think we're close here. Thank you for everybody's patience. This is important work, and I do appreciate everybody's consideration. Okay, with that, we're back in session. I don't know why I'm doing that, but Vice Chair Goldman, do you want to bring us up to speed?
Yes, so we had a good conversation with the police chief and city attorney. The feeling is there's some nuance in this language that's been recommended by public comment, and we would want to make sure to vet it. We think the best course of action would be to pass the resolution as is, but at the same time, commit to continuing this discussion with the police chief, with the public, making it clear, what are the standards? What are we expecting of our officers? What are we not expecting of our officers? Because it is nuanced, especially when we're engaging with federal officials. So that's the recommendation of staff, is would be to pass the resolution as it's presented in the packet, but commit to having this conversation with the community.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goldman, and thank you to staff for that, and Councilmember Good particularly. Deputy Mayor Furtani.
And thanks really for having that discussion. I really appreciate the break in which we could actually clarify some of this stuff and actually do the right thing for the community. Of course, we don't want to get out, as you would like saying, out ahead of our skis. So,
Out over our skis.
But two of the potential Section E that you were discussing, I've gotten a couple of comments from our residents, and certainly some of you have seen this in the messages that we get. One of them is basically being consistent with the King County Prosecutor's Office in terms of prosecuting crimes that are committed here, regardless of the origin of the crime. And so that's another one that I'd like to toss on to y'all who are writing the resolution. I know that you're doing a parking lot of sorts in terms of like what other things do we have to address, but if we could add that to that, that would be great.
Councilmember Resnick.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, this process that is now on the recording is a lot of what has gone into trying to draft this, because there is a lot of policy here and there's nuances, and we understand that the officers in the field who are responding to a situation it's a dynamic situation. There's a lot that we can't anticipate sitting here that we know that we're asking people to deal with in the moment. And so we want to put enough caveats around the aspirational language that we're trying to write. We want to put enough caveats around it to respect the unpredictable circumstances and not then make it so full of Swiss cheese that it doesn't mean anything anymore. And that's the hard balance. And so earlier, the word timid was used, and I don't think that we're being timid. I think that we're setting high aspirations and trying to keep it operational as well. And that's a hard balance, and it'll continue. It's something that as public comment said, there will be further legislation that touches on a lot of these issues that we'll see by the end of the legislative session. And so I think it would make a lot of sense to come back and revisit this further, and circumstances will change. I also did get a comment from someone asking whether Ruben Ray Martinez was mentioned in here, and he's not. And this sort of highlights the weirdness of this entire, outside of what's happening at Lake Forest Park, the entire situation we're responding to. This is a death that happened, someone who was killed by an ICE officer, but ICE's role was not acknowledged until in 2025.
Yeah. So
outside the time of what we're talking about here, we're only naming people from 2026, but so it was in 2025, but the fact that ICE was involved only came out this calendar year. So there's all of this weird stuff coming in around it, and it's messy, and we're being careful, and I appreciate that.
I did notice that, and that list is probably going to ever grow, and that's my concern. So maybe is the list of people is separate from this resolution so that it can be updated. So you direct it to a list, because the list is going to grow. and the list is going to change, and you can't always update the resolution. But if you point the language in the resolution perhaps points to a list of names in recognition, maybe that would be easier to be updated as the list grows. So we won't leave out anyone.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would be comfortable passing this as it stands today, and then yes, in future, I mean, we can hope that there will not be more names. That is the expectation and the desire. I think that the reality is, as you say, likely not to land there, and so yeah, I think we should think about how we handle that. Hopefully, it continues to be rare enough that it is possible to recognize in the moment. But yeah, we can think about that.
Thank you, council members, both of you. This is very important. I think what I'm hearing, and want to make sure that we haven't heard from Councilmember Riddle yet, or Councilmember Muhlenberg. What I'm hearing is that the recommendation is to move forward with what we have. It's a living document. Council will be considering changes to it in the very near future.
Or a follow-up.
As a follow-up, and this is not the end. I don't want to use the word end. It's just not finito. This is something that's going to continue to move forward. Councilmember Riddle, you want to start, and then Councilmember Muhlenberg, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think just to kind of echo what you're saying, this is going to kind of be a bit of a living document because the situation is consistently changing. And so just because if we vote and pass this tonight, it's not, like you said, it's not like final one and done. We need to continue to evolve our approach as the situation evolves around us.
You bet. Councilmember Muhlenberg.
I think we've come a long way in the 8 weeks that we've been talking about this particular resolution. There's ample opportunity for us to bring additional resolutions to the council over time as the situation on the ground changes. So I'm very much with moving forward with what we've presented here tonight. And I'm putting a stake in the ground and moving on and re-emphasizing what the next resolution we might bring.
Thank you, Councilmember. Vice Chair Goldman.
Yep, I concur that I view this as a sort of a two-stage process. Stage one is telling the community this is our current policy. This is what we expect our local police officers to be doing. Phase two will be to evaluate, are we going to get some new legislation coming through from the state, for instance, regarding masking? That's something that the state legislature is currently considering. Are we going to get guidance from the state attorney general's office? Are we going to get guidance from King County, from the King County prosecutor's office? So taking that evolving landscape to see, well, do we need to make changes to our city policy? But phase one, this resolution, I think it is a very good resolution that I do want it to communicate to the community at large.
Thank you, everybody. Deputy Mayor Fertoni.
So I'd like to move Resolution 2061, reaffirming the City of Lake Forest Park's commitment to community policing, de-escalation, and the protection of constitutional rights.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt resolution 2061, reaffirming the City of Lake Forest Park's commitment to community policing, de-escalation, and the protection of constitutional rights. Do I hear any further discussion? Deputy Mayor Fertoni.
Yes, I was concerned that in fact, we had, heard from some members of the public about basically some of the more stronger language, and that I'm really glad that we're going to continue the discussion to basically stay in line with, of course, what our police department is willing to do, as well as within state guidelines as well. The point is basically that the discussion continues, and that's really the important part.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Colleagues, Deputy Mayor, Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you, Mayor.
Budget Chair Riddle. There you go. I'll find a title. There we go.
What I appreciate about this particular piece of, legislation is how we worked well with our police department to make sure that this is representative of all of the existing policies and really highlights them. And I think it also is a good example of what happens when you have a police department that's within your city and that collaborativeness that you get that you may not get from other ways of keeping your policing.
Chair's privilege, I'd like to piggyback on that. I really want to thank Councilmember Rosano and Chief Harden. We sat down 5 weeks ago for lunch to talk this through. rather than doing a back and forth and having these various things, in Lake Forest Park, we are friends and neighbors and colleagues, and we get things done. And hats off to you too, because I just sat there and listened. They did a great job working through the issues, figuring it out, and you all are benefiting from the work that they did. So I deeply appreciate you both for that. So any other questions or comments on this? Councilmember
just
Rosenberg.
pick up on that and certainly thank the chief and the police department for the feedback and the insight onto how this, what this means on the ground, and making sure that this is really something that's functional. And say, you know, I've been talking about this with other council members in other cities and trying to get borrow good ideas and make sure that what we're doing is in line with what is happening across the region. And in a lot of other cities in the area, language that is not as forceful as what we have here, their police departments are sort of shrugging and saying, well, you can pass a resolution. I don't know what we're going to do on the field. And they're not getting that same level of support. And so I really appreciate, and the community can appreciate that, knowing that our police department is thinking about this seriously and takes the concern seriously and is really working on this in partnership with the community and with the council, and really trying to get ahead of this and treat it as the crisis situation that I think we all regard it as. So I really appreciate that, and I want to thank the department for all their contributions on this.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions or comments? Comments, I should say. Hearing none, all those in favor of adoption of Resolution 26-2061, reaffirming the City of Lake Forest Park's commitment to community policing, de-escalation, and protection of constitutional rights, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. Thank you, Council. Great work. This is really important for the community and the region. Way to be a model for that. Thank you so much. Yes.
May I ask a procedural question?
Of course.
Since I believe this is of general interest to the community, is this something that might be communicated as a newsflash? Like generally posing the question?
Yeah,
We'll make it.
We could certainly do that, yes.
Yes. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, thank you for that. Larry, we absolutely will make that. It's a very important work, and people need to be aware of it and understand too that it's going to continue to be evolving. Council, was there an item of other business?
Yes.
Councilmember Riddle.
I just want to bring to council sort of an initial schedule for moving through the early stages of determining if it's going to be levy and when. And so this early stage is really about getting us up to speed on the property tax Excel file, figuring out what amounts we're going to be looking at, seeing if there's any policy revisions that need to be made. And then getting us basically through early April to get to a kind of a place where we can make a decision. What are we going to look for? When are we going to have the levy if we choose to have a levy? I am looking at perhaps putting in a special meeting on April 2nd if we need it. But I expect us to have this discussion topic on March 12th as part of the work session. Will be introduction. Obviously, the 19th, the Budget and Finance Committee meeting will be moving the questions and the comments forward on what amounts we want in the different funds and any policy issues. The COW the following week, I anticipate we'll have some more continuing conversation. And then special meeting on the 2nd. We have council on the 9th. And I think that's where we need to make kind of the decision. What are we going to do? How are we going to move forward? We can refine things more from there, but I think we need to give administration and our community a sense of where we're going and what our thoughts are. And so that's where I'm hoping that we have kind of able to make a decision. So if so that's where I am with the kind of the calendar and scheduling. Is there any concerns by
Questions?
councils?
Did that go out
Council members?
on the same news flash?
Yeah, I think we want to put out maybe a different or same, probably different news flash.
Oh, yeah.
So the community is aware of these dates. so that they can be aware and come in and participate.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Riddle, colleagues, any other business?
Yes, at our committee of the whole meeting on Monday, one of our topics was neighborhood business zones. And we had thought of the idea of creating a council ad hoc subcommittee to discuss our current neighborhood business zones and any modifications we might want to make in terms of the location of the zones, what sort of businesses are or are not allowed. And so I just wanted to put out a call. I know Councilmember Saunders had to leave, but are there 3 council members that would be interested in serving on this neighborhood business subcommittee?
I would volunteer as tribute.
Okay, so I see Budget Chair Riddle. I see Councilmember Rosenau.
Me too, if you need me.
Yeah, I'm also interested. So either myself or Councilmember Good could be the 3rd member. So we could arm wrestle for it, I suppose, or
We don't wrestle, we thumb wrestle. It's less expensive for insurance.
If it's something that you are passionate about, I'd be happy to defer to you.
I mean, I have a neighborhood business, so I thought it might be helpful, but.
Well, you guys could talk
Okay.
about it.
Yeah.
No,
off-
I'm happy to defer. So then council members Riddle, Good, and Rosenau will be the subcommittee for neighborhood business. Cool.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Anything else? Just checking through. I mean, we're kind of bleeding into council member reports. Any other council member topical? Yes, Councilmember Muhlenberg.
Parks and Rec Board met this past week. Was a fun meeting. There was a couple of topics. Linda Holman gave an update on the Blue Heron Park project. If you haven't been over to Blue Heron recently, you should go check it out. That was a park that to me, just 6 months ago felt unsafe because there were so many very dark and secluded corners of the park. There's been a crew that has ranged from 6 people last week, which was the smallest turnout, to I think almost 19 or 20 at one of the sessions we went to. And there's now line of sight from the street all the way into the creek and where the picnic table area is. A tremendous amount of invasives have been removed, and they're starting to move on now to planning for what it's going to look like as they start to put new vegetation in. So amazing progress. That group that's doing that is should be recognized for that work. The second part of the meeting was to talk about the Lakefront Park, and through collaboration with the Shoreline Historical Museum, we were presented with all kinds of images of what the Rose property looked like back in the early 1900s. It was a lot of fun to go through those images. The debate focused around how many of these should we present as historical signs inside the park. I think the committee's landed on somewhere between 4 and 6 of those images.
Just correction, not Rose is the gate. It's originally the Gates property,
I'm sorry,
Schroeder property. Yeah, Rose is, yeah.
That's the other one.
Yeah,
My apologies.
No,
Still learning all the details.
It's good to have more than one park to think about.
Right.
Yeah.
There is general interest in seeing more historical photos from any residents that might have it. So I wanted to make that statement here. If people have photos of what that property used to look like back in the day, please bring them forward to the committee. Everything we've sourced so far has come through the society. So very neat.
And that could include pictures like from the dock at the Civic Club pointing that direction and
course.
other things.
Yeah.
Historical stuff. Yeah.
There's even talk of maybe doing sign rotations. So they may only put 4 signs out, but have a rotation of them that go out on a quarterly basis that might align with the seasons or something else. And then moving on from the Parks and Rec Board, the Riot 8 group is doing a briefing for Councilmember Good and myself on next Friday on the work they do and the history they have in the community. So very excited about that. I'm sure we could have one more person join if anybody's interested in joining with us. And likely we could have it recorded if people are interested in seeing that content.
Thank you, Councilmember Riddle.
Just a comment as you look through these historical photos, if there's anything of relevance that maybe we could have shared with the Shoreline Historical Museum.
It all came from the Shoreline
that's
Historical
really-
Museum.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We were up there perusing those files a while ago.
But I suppose if anyone has it in their personal collection.
Yeah.
David Brigham.
You bet.
David
Colleagues.
contact him.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes,
Mr. Goldman.
yep, last week, the King County Regional Transit Committee met. Most of the time was spent planning out our work plan, but one thing that came up is that it seems likely, not guaranteed, but likely that the King County Transportation Benefit District, which is coterminous with King County itself, may be putting a 0.2% sales tax increase on the ballot sometime this year. Not definite if it'll happen or in which election it'll happen, but it is something that King County is considering. Most of the money, if it passes, most of the money would be directed to King County Metro for additional transit service.
Only
Okay.
if they get us a bus.
It's a little different from what they said, but yeah, thank you.
Like this is something it's going to be, we're going to hear another presentation at the Regional Transit Committee. It'll also come to the SCA pick.
Oh, yes, good. Yes. Colleagues, looking down the dais here. Okay. Just quickly, Councilmember Riddle beat me to it. The question of the Shoreline Historical Museum. I was at the Blue and Gold dinner for the Scouts the other night, and one of the Scoutmasters indicated to me he just was handed 100+ years of history of the troops here in Lake Forest Park. And I said, you got to get that in the hands of the museum so it's happy. And he says it's boxes and boxes. And so we'll see how that goes. But the call out is the same to everyone. If you have boxes of historical photos or whatever else, don't worry about the digitizing. The museum and Bennett and people who donate to the museum will help figure out how to get those into the files so that they're preserved. We're losing a lot of history here. I know Councilmember Muhlenberg's comment about the Lakefront Park. There is at least one very large box of photos from that property that are in Eastern Washington that I've been trying to secure. And we'll see if we can get those back over here from the 30s. There's some other photographs too that we've been, and records that we're losing because people are passing or they're moving out or, you know, the various life happens. So it's an important part of our history. It really is. And the region's history as well. So couple of things. I'm on the Sound Cities board. And we had our retreat on Tuesday at the Seahawks boardroom down in Renton at the practice facilities. A very, very enthusiastic, incredibly talented group of people on that board. I can't speak highly enough about the direction Sound Cities is going. It's been reinvigorated and re-energized. And I would encourage any of you, if you want to know more about Sound Cities, there's going to be a social hour next week. I think it's the 4th. There's some other events coming up too as well. And one of the big topics that came out of 7 hours of meetings was how to build the bench deeper with elected officials, not just the ones that are serving on the SCA PIC or on one of the various boards that are at the opportunity. Reminder to everybody, you have the 800-pound gorilla that's nearly 1 million people in Seattle, and you have the Sound Cities Association, which is 38 cities, nearly 1 million people, and one voice. And that's what they're trying to champion, and which now I am trying to assist with that as well. I came away from that meeting very energized. Sadly, somebody had a medical issue during the meeting, so that kind of broke our stride a little bit, but he's going to be fine. And one of the great things about the end of that meeting was we got to tour the facility, and some of you may know I got to hold the Heisman Trophy, which was mind-blowing. I mean, Lombardi, excuse me, Heisman, sorry, wrong. I'm already thinking ahead to college, the Lombardi Trophy. Yeah, it was and everyone at the Seahawks organization was just absolutely extraordinarily gracious to us. It was really a wonderful place for us to, our host, Armando Pavone, Mayor Pavone from Renton, set it up. And it's a great organization. I really recommend getting at least educated about the organization to understand what they do. They have great policy advice, and they do represent the 38 cities outside of the city of Seattle. So they're doing great work. There have been some hiccups, as some of you know, over the last couple of years, but they're back on track. So that's really the principal reason why I agreed to be considered for the board, because they're really doing great things again and reinvigorated. Couple other things. I was stuck in traffic, dark 30 this morning, coming back from the east side, and I looked up, there were 8 eagles circling right above Kenmore Lake Forest Park line. So you know me and my wildlife. Boy, that's pretty magical to see, especially sitting in traffic, not moving. So, Administrator Hill, do you have anything to add to the mix?
I do not. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Riddle.
I would like to highlight one of the items that's in the city administrator report, and that's a collision that occurred on Perkins Way, which resulted in a vehicle nearly in the stream, vehicle traveling too fast, hit another car that was just trying to go where they wanted to go. And I know we've had this conversation before, but I think this might be the year where we talk about Perkins Way and really try to do something to make that stretch safer. So just to highlight it, it's still an issue and we do need to do something about it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Deputy Mayor Furtoni.
And I can't agree with Councilmember Riddle more. In fact, that was the question I was going to pose. So I'm going to pose a slightly less contentious question, which is basically what happened to the bike? I was fascinated by the little bike thing. Yeah.
It's still out there.
Did somebody come get it finally? No, okay. Okay.
I mean, ingeniously assembled.
Okay. You bet.
It is in the CA report, but remind the community, we've been blasting on social media. Commander Zanella is starting up the next Community Police Academy.
Right.
So he wants to fill those positions. So if anybody in the community is interested, Councilmember Good and Riddle and Ferritani have all attended it, so they know what it's all about. So if we could just get that word out there, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. Just quickly on this subject of Perkins, we're going to be doing an assessment of the condition of Perkins and where our hand may be forced regardless of what people want. It's in serious degradation. So, and we keep having pieces slough off into the creek. We'll see where it goes. So, but that's going to be coming down the line. At the very least, we're going to have to limit traffic going through there because of there are probably millions of dollars worth of repairs that need to be occurring on that road that have been deferred. So we'll see how it goes here in the spring. Anything else for the good of the order, folks?
I have one thing for the good of the order.
You bet.
The League of Women Voters is going to be supporting a reading of the Constitution at Third Place Commons on May 3rd, which I think is May Day or near May Day. It's a Sunday afternoon from 3 to 5. The Constitution gets broken into 100 discrete elements that get read in sequential order, and people sign up to read each one of the individual pieces. So I participated in this several times in my life and have hosted it as a team bonding event at some of the companies I've worked at. It's really an exceptional experience to have. And some people come in with great passion about the piece of the Constitution that they want to read. And there's a tremendous amount of emotion that gets conveyed in the experience. So I encourage you all to spread the word, to get involved. At some point, there will be a sign-up sheet so that people can come in and pick one of the 100 lines.
Thank you for
May
that.
3rd.
Thank you. And speaking of events next week, Third Place Commons breakfast.
Yep.
I forget the date.
March 4th.
4th. Thank you, everybody. I hope to see everybody. I know it's sold out, so I'm sure they could find room for you if you haven't gotten a ticket yet.
I have one open seat at my table if anybody needs a place to sit.
Hey.
It's already paid for.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Stay here all.